And the U.S. military now says overnight it intercepted 2 Iranian ballistic missiles targeting American forces in Kuwait, adding, though, that no American personnel were harmed in this. This comes as the U.S. says that it hit Iranian military sites overnight in defensive attacks.
We are seeing new footage of missile launches broadcast from Iran today. CNN cannot confirm where or when this video was shot, but it was shown on Iranian state media as both the US and Iran reported new exchanges of fire over the weekend. And as US President Donald Trump requests changes to the proposed Memorandum of Understanding with Tehran, which is meant to build on the existing, somewhat shaky ceasefire. Let's get a read on where things stand this hour. Our international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, is with us for that. Nick, a very basic question at this point. How long can this go on for?
Yeah, it's hard to know because it did seem, and everyone knows this, that last weekend it seemed to be close, that the Pakistani mediators have spent days in Tehran. They'd got everyone to a position, a sort of a memorandum of understanding where the language was more or less locked in, and it was thought to be hours, maybe a couple of days away. But now we do seem to be in this protracted situation where the president foreshadows a key meeting, and then what comes out of it are more word and language changes, it appears, for the Iranians. The Iranians maintain their position of a complete lack of trust in the US negotiations. And both sides are on a hair trigger, it seems, for a possible escalation of military attacks. Those ballistic missiles that were fired at Kuwait, that CENTCOM said they successfully intercepted a couple of ballistic missiles in the early part of the morning, are really, I think a slightly increased uptick over what we saw Iran's response when the US had defensive measures against some of its military installations in the Strait of Hormuz, close to the Strait of Hormuz last week. So there's this sort of incrementalism, and there is a possibility here. So to answer how long can he keep going, the sources I'm talking to at the moment, when I suggest is it a week, is it more than a week, seem to be suggesting that it would be less than a week. But I think to try to hold on to specific words when this backwards and forwards ping pong, as one source has described it to me, between the US and Iran over the talks. But it's that lack of trust, and I think we sort of got a sense of that from the main negotiator in Iran, Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament. And also note how he is dressed. A politician here with an IRGC background, but dressed here in military fatigues.
The soldiers on the diplomatic front have absolutely no trust in the enemy's words and promises. Our only criteria is to achieve tangible results before we fulfill our commitments in return. Until we are certain that the rights of the Iranian people have been secured, we will not approve any agreement.
So when you have a politician like that dressed in military fatigues, it's all part of the symbolic and positional messaging that's going on here. And Iran's key lack of trust and faith in the United States is, will it follow through? And it wants these commitments to be stood up more boldly, if you will, it appears, on war reparations, money for war damage, frozen funds to be released. And they don't want to get dragged into a public debate and put out publicly what's being said or not behind closed doors about Iran's position on its highly enriched uranium and its position on enriching uranium going forward. And that's why I think there's so much secrecy around what's going on. President Trump doesn't want these details out there because he doesn't want to be seen to be giving Iran an easy time or a lot of money associated with whatever deal comes through. And we're stuck in that. But so best estimate to your answer, I'll go back to what the source said a little while ago. Maybe we're looking at a week or so.
Joining me now to discuss more about this, CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier and CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Leighton. Kim, to you first. Is the ceasefire essentially over? Are we at square one here? Or is this kind of a typical thing during warfare that they are going to be exchanging fire?
Yeah, we're still in the small skirmish level. We haven't seen the U.S. return to all-out strikes together with Israel across Iran. But we are coming to a date on the calendar which has got some of us a little bit anxious. You know, Saudi Arabia had asked the White House to delay a return to strikes and try to make a deal, but at least to delay strikes until the end of the Hajj. And that's about now, when you've got Eid and celebrations. So you could see President Trump sending this text back that Elena talked about, and if Iran says no, perhaps a return to strikes, which Israel has been pushing for. Then again, we haven't seen President Trump at any point apparently satisfied that he's got a military plan to take back the Strait of Hormuz, and that's really what he's holding out for. He needs that open.
Colonel Layton, the New York Times has the U.S. military saying that it's quietly guiding ships through the Strait of Hormuz, an official telling them about 70 have been guided through, commercial ships. Can you give us some sense of the precariousness of this kind of move and all of this, with the Strait being what it is today?
Yes, Sarah, good morning. One of the things that they have to watch out for, of course, is mines. And that's really the most important thing that the Navy has to deal with as they guide these ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the other things they have to watch out for are drones and Iranian missiles. So it really amounts to a complete overwatch element that has to be used here. And in order to do this, they have to very carefully navigate a very narrow passageway, that 21-mile passageway between the tip of Oman and the Iranian coast. And when you do that, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. They're very, the U.S. Navy has had a lot of experience going through these waters over many years, many decades, and they know the area quite well, so they can tell when there's an anomaly. But there's always a chance that a mine could be there, or that something else could happen, such as a drone attack or a missile attack, that could, render this kind of an operation very dangerous.
Look, Iran's chief negotiator has said the U.S. is not complying with the ceasefire after those weekend strikes. Here's what he put on X. He said the naval blockade and escalation of war crimes in Lebanon by the genocidal Zionist regime are clear evidence of U.S. noncompliance with the ceasefire. It's interesting here that he has added Lebanon into the mix. What does this tell you, Kim, about the negotiation expectations? Because for a long time, as we've understood it, it has to do with opening the strait, at least the MOU, and the nuclear capabilities of Iran. Lebanon didn't seem to be on the table. What does this tell you?
Iran is saying that Lebanon is still part of what it needs to see, especially as we're watching Israel ratchet up the attacks. They just took the Beaufort Fort. That's a Crusader-era fort that has sort of a high point over much of southern Lebanon. But it is a real touch point in Israeli society. The last time the Israelis occupied it was 1982, in that nearly 20-year occupation of Lebanon. So it's signals that Netanyahu is not ready to leave that fight. Hezbollah has also been attacking south, and Iran is saying, you've got to solve that, or you're not going to have a full deal with us.
Sina Zodi is the director of the Middle East Studies program at George Washington University. He's also the author of Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran and the Nuclear Question. He joins me from Washington, D.C. It's good to see you, sir. President Trump has apparently sent back changes to this draft agreement. Based on what we're hearing, does this suggest that the two sides are actually close to a deal, or are there still major obstacles for them to overcome?
I think we are still close to the deal. We heard in the past few days that they were very close to the deal. But it appears to me that President Trump is under a lot of pressure, and it was in your reporting actually, that he's under pressure from the right wing of his party, a lot of pundits on the right side, the people who really have historically opposed diplomacy between Iran and the United States. So he really doesn't want to give him any excuses. That's why he needs to adopt a more kind of a hardliner position, especially when it comes, again, as it was in your reporting, unfreezing of the Iranian assets. This is why I think there's a lot of back and forth. The Iranian side has also said that they want assurances about the deal and the future of the deal. They've also threatened that if it doesn't serve their interests, they're going to tear it apart. And they actually used the example of the U.S. in 2015. So there's a lot of back and forth, and both sides are trying to protect their chips.
President Trump did recently describe the deal as largely finalized, though. So do you think that was an accurate reflection of where things were at?
I think so. But we have to keep in mind that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed upon, meaning that this MOU or the Memorandum of Understanding that Iran and the United States are trying to come to an agreement, it really involves a political understanding about ending the conflict and Iran's commitment not to ever procure in any way nuclear weapons. But it's going to be far more in detail. There has to be technical understanding of how Iran will curtail its nuclear program and so on and so forth, and what will the United States do. But I still think we're very close, but the details need to be discussed and agreed.
If a deal is reached, what would success actually look like for the United States? Is the goal preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon or eliminating its nuclear future altogether?
Well, I think the president's stated comments are that Iran cannot have developed nuclear weapons. This is something that the Iranians have committed themselves under the NPT and actually JCPOA. But I think the president is conflating no nuclear weapons with dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program, meaning that he really, at least he's under pressure from some people to pressure Iranians to completely dismantle the nuclear program, something that they are not going to agree to. They want to preserve some nuclear capacity. But if he really wants no nuclear weapons, I think there are many ways to ensure that Iran cannot procure or sneak out and develop nuclear weapons. I think there are many ways to do that. For example, the option of zero stockpile of enriched uranium, which was previously on the table, and the Iranians had agreed to it. I think that's one way to ensure that they can never develop nuclear weapons. A moratorium also on enriching uranium, that's also another way that would ease the concerns of the United States for a long period of time.